In 1989, a group of tourists were on a sea voyage on a yacht near Madeira Beach when suddenly they spotted a floating object on the water's surface. As they approached it, they discovered that it was the body of a woman. The police were notified, and after a search, they found 2 more bodies of women from the same area. The victims' legs were tied with a rope, and the rope was connected to a cement block. The search for the perpetrator would be long, but in the end, the police would uncover it in a strange and unique way. The story's events are thrilling, and you'll need to follow it to the end because it has many surprises. The story is set in 1989 in the state of Florida, USA. The state is shaped like a peninsula, surrounded by water from all directions, and it attracts many tourists throughout the year. Most of these tourists end up in coastal areas. One of these areas was the city named Tampa. There was a group of tourists on a yacht tour in Tampa when suddenly they spotted a strange object floating on the water. As they approached it, they were surprised to discover that it was the body of a woman. Immediately, they contacted the Coast Guard. The body was not far from the coast, only about 3 kilometers. The Coast Guard arrived and retrieved the woman's body. They were surprised to find that her mouth was taped shut and her hands were bound with a yellow rope. What was even worse is that her legs were tied to a cement block, indicating that someone had tied her up and deliberately drowned her in the sea. The Coast Guard began searching the ocean and the area for any evidence or anything that could be related to the case. Soon, during their search in the area, they discovered 2 additional bodies, both women, also killed in the same manner with their mouths taped shut and their legs tied to cement blocks. The police noted that all 3 victims were found with their lower clothing removed, leading them to suspect that they had been sexually assaulted before being thrown into the sea. This added a disturbing dimension to the crime. Even more disturbing, their lungs were filled with water, indicating that they had been drowned while still alive. This revelation added a horrifying level of cruelty to the crime, suggesting a deliberate and gruesome act by the perpetrator. It's indeed a horrifying and cruel crime. The killer not only murdered the victims but also subjected them to a torturous and agonizing death. The way he tied the cement blocks to them, making them sink into the water while still alive, indicates a level of sadistic enjoyment in causing extreme pain and psychological suffering to his victims. This crime is nothing short of an execution, and the victims must have experienced unimaginable fear and horror as they witnessed their own deaths unfolding moment by moment. The police faced a challenging task in solving such a heinous and calculated crime. But how did the bodies float on the water's surface with the bricks still attached to them? The answer is that after a person dies and their body begins to decompose, it releases internal gases. These gases inflate the body from the inside, making it buoyant like a balloon. As a result, the body floats, and even heavy objects like bricks can rise to the surface along with the body. The second thing the police noticed was that the 3 victims shared a resemblance in their features, leading them to speculate that they were likely related, possibly a mother and her daughters, despite the age differences among the victims. The victims' bodies had started to decompose, making it challenging to identify them. The police announced the incident to the media. Of course, they didn't release any photos of the victims or their bodies because of their advanced state of decomposition. However, they did announce that 3 bodies were found, including an older woman believed to be the mother and 2 teenage girls believed to be her daughters. They requested anyone with information about them to contact the police. It didn't take long before the police received a call from the manager of one of the hotels in the area. The hotel manager told the investigators that they had a female guest who had rented a room with her 2 daughters, and they hadn't seen any sign of them for 3 days. The cleaning staff found all their belongings inside the room, left untouched, as if they had disappeared. The police went to the hotel and obtained the identities of the mother and her 2 daughters. The mother's name was Joan Rogers, her older daughter was named Michelle, and she was 17 years old. Her younger daughter was named Christ, and she was 14 years old. After they identified their identities, they realized that they originally came from the state of Ohio, which was more than 15 kilometers away from Florida. It became clear that they had come for tourism. The investigators managed to contact the father, whose name was Hal Rogers, who was also Joan's husband. The family was all together, managing a dairy farm in Ohio. The farm included chickens and cows, and running the farm was an exhausting job that required constant work year-round without a break. The farm animals required daily care, so when the mother and daughters wanted to take a vacation and have a change of scenery, the father couldn't join them. The farm needed constant attention, and their financial situation and income from the farm were not sufficient to hire workers or people to assist him, so he couldn't leave the farm at all. That's why the mother and daughters went on vacation, while the father stayed behind to take care of the farm. The family was scheduled to return on June 1st, but days passed, and the father didn't even attempt to contact the police or report his family's disappearance. This raised suspicion, and the police questioned him multiple times. However, all his statements were true, and they couldn't catch him in a lie. Additionally, all the town residents confirmed his presence in the town, witnessing that he had not left the town and had exhibited good and calm behavior. The police became convinced that he had no involvement in the crime. In Florida, the forensic experts examined the bodies in the hope of finding some evidence, but unfortunately, they couldn't find any traces such as fingerprints, hair, or DNA because everything had decomposed in the water. The bodies had remained in the water for 3 days, which had effectively erased any potential evidence that might have been present on them. The police were also searching for the mother's car and eventually found it at a small boat dock on the coast. They concluded that it was likely the mother and her daughters had boarded a boat from this dock, and the boat was likely owned by the perpetrator. This small dock appeared to be their point of departure. The police began searching inside the mother's car and found important items. They found 2 handwritten notes, and each note was written in a different handwriting, indicating that 2 different individuals had written on them. The first note was a map, and it also had handwritten directions to the location of the hotel where they were staying. As for the second note, it contained directions to the location of the dock where the car was parked. The investigators took the 2 notes and gave them to forensic experts to analyze the handwriting. The note with directions to the location of the dock was written in the mother's handwriting. It was Joan Rogers' handwriting. As for the second note, the one with the map and the hotel's location written in a different handwriting, it was composed in the handwriting of an unknown person, and the writing style was distinctive. For example, in the word Courtney, the letter T in the middle of the word was capitalized, which was unusual because capital letters are typically used at the beginning of words. When you write a capital letter in the middle of a word, it's something unusual and different. Additionally, the letter Y was written in a peculiar way, with 4 distinct strokes for each Y in the writing. This meant that the unknown person who wrote the directions to the hotel had a very distinctive handwriting style. The police focused all their attention on these 2 notes because they believed they might lead them to the perpetrator. In any case, these 2 notes were the only lead they had. Let's go back to the first note, the one written by the mother with directions to the dock. The last 2 words on this note were written are blue and white. Now, if they were heading to a dock, what could be blue and white at the dock? Most likely, a boat. The investigators deduced that the boat might be associated with this color. They began gathering more information. Later, the police received a report about a man living in the area who was running a business without a license and was using the dock where boats departed from. This business involved taking tourists on sunset cruises. This man, Jason Wilcox, had a blue and white boat. After the police looked into his background, they discovered that he had a criminal record and had previously been in prison for a physical assault. When they found his address, it was approximately 8 kilometers from the small dock. The police went to his house and found the boat in the backyard, along with cement blocks similar to the ones used to tie the victims' bodies. Jason denied any involvement in the crime, and without concrete physical evidence against him, the police couldn't take any action. They couldn't even request a handwriting sample from him to compare it to the unknown person's handwriting. However, the investigators continued to keep a close eye on him and monitor his activities. The crime became widely known, and the victims' pictures were circulated in the media. They even put up large billboards in the streets, offering a reward of $25,000 for anyone who provided information leading to the resolution of the case. The police were receiving numerous calls and reports from people daily, but most of them didn't lead to anything substantial. However, there was someone who provided important information. This person was actually a Canadian girl who was also visiting Florida as a tourist. This girl's name was Judy Blair, and her picture was not published in the media. This girl had actually reported an assault incident to the police that happened to her on the same boat 2 weeks before the murder of Joan and her daughters. So, this Canadian girl, Judy, explains that she was on vacation in Florida with one of her friends one day, and they were strolling around the area. A man approached them and started talking to them. This man was kind and polite, and he told them that he had a business where he took tourists on boat tours during sunset. Judy's friend declined the offer, but Judy liked the idea of the boat and the sea at sunset. She felt that the view was too good to pass up. Quickly, the scene of the sunset from the boat in the middle of the sea turned from something beautiful and remarkable to a dramatic and tragic incident. Judy went on the boat trip with the stranger, and when they were alone in the middle of the sea with no one around, the man pulled out a knife and placed it at her throat, threatening her that if she didn't allow him to do what he wanted, he would kill her. The criminal intended to assault her and warned her not to try jumping into the sea and swimming because the water was full of sharks. Here, the girl was begging and pleading with him to spare her, but the criminal carried out this vile assault and overpowered her. And after darkness fell, he moved the boat back towards the shore. When they were close to the coast, he ordered her to get into the water and swim to save herself. Investigators say that he most likely ordered her to swim to remove any evidence related to him from her body, such as fingerprints, hair, or DNA. The only thing she knew was his appearance, and the police created a sketch resembling the perpetrator. Now, the Canadian girl, Judy, has become a key witness in the case. She is the only one who saw the perpetrator's face and confirmed that the boat was white and blue. The first thing the investigators did was to show her a picture of Jason Wilcox, the person they suspected. When she saw his picture, she immediately said no. Jason Wilcox doesn't resemble the assailant who attacked her. Additionally, Jason Wilcox had an alibi, as some people testified that he was with them on the day of the crimes. Jason Wilcox was acquitted of both charges, the sexual assault on Judy Blair and the murder of Joan and her daughters Michelle and Christy. At that time, the police knew that the unknown person who wrote on the paper was likely connected to the crime, but they couldn't trace the owner of the distinctive handwriting. The situation continued for 3 years. 3 years had passed, and the case remained unsolved until the year 1992. The case was still open at that time. One of the investigators working on the case came up with a strange and unique idea. She took the paper they found in the mother's car, which was a map with handwritten instructions to the hotel in distinctive handwriting. The police believed that this handwriting belonged to the killer. Since the handwriting was very distinctive, there was a possibility that someone might recognize it. The police put up 5 large billboards in the streets, printing the writing done by the killer in large letters and adding beside it, "Who wrote these instructions? Maybe you know the killer who murdered the Rogers family. The reward of $25,000. The movement was very strange and distinctive, and it had not been used before. Joan Stevie was walking down the street one day and saw one of the billboards that the police had hung up, the billboards with the handwriting of the criminal. As soon as she saw it, she recognized the handwriting because it was distinctive. She immediately called the police and told them that this handwriting resembled the handwriting of a contractor who had worked on her house before. She had old invoices with his handwriting. She invited them to come and check. The investigators went to her, and she told them that she had dealt with a contractor who worked in the aluminum industry some time ago, and he had done some work for her at home and provided her with invoices. The handwriting in the invoices resembled the handwriting on the billboard advertisement. The lady also informed them that this man's personality was strange, and he always spoke in a weird way, as if he were lying all the time. Her experience with him was bad, and the investigators took the invoices from her and sent them to the forensic expert who specializes in analyzing handwriting. With a quick glance, the expert identified that the 2 handwritings matched perfectly. They found the capital letter T in the middle of many words, and the shape of the letter T was an exact match. They also found unusual variations of the letter Y after the letter T. There was no doubt about it. The person who wrote the invoice was the same person who wrote the directions to the hotel for Joan Rogers. So, the police went straight to him and arrested him, and any doubts were dispelled. When they placed the drawing next to his face, it was an exact match. The criminal's name was Oba Chandler, and he was 43 years old at the time. He was married and had an astonishing 8 children with 7 different women. He also owned an aluminum contracting company specializing in aluminum work for houses, such as kitchens and doors. He had a criminal record dating back to his teenage years, which included assaults on women, and he had spent several years in prison. Above all this, he owned a blue and white boat. One of the strong pieces of evidence they found afterward was a log of radio communications for boats in the area. This log recorded radio calls made from any boat in the region to the Coast Guard. The records confirmed that Oba Chandler's boat was in the sea at the time of the crime because the perpetrator apparently contacted his wife after the crime to inform her that he had some issues with the boat and would be delayed in returning. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Oba Chandler denied the charges and claimed he was innocent. The police showed Judy Blair, the Canadian woman who was assaulted on the boat, a lineup of photos including Oba Chandler's picture and several others. Without hesitation, Judy pointed to his picture and said, "This is him, I'm sure." Her facial expression clearly displayed fear and disgust. The police took another step and had Oba Chandler stand in a lineup with other people for the girl to see him directly in front of her eyes and identify him. And just like before, without hesitation, she pointed at him and confidently said, "This is the one who attacked me," confirming that Oba Chandler was the perpetrator. The investigators discovered that he sold the boat only 3 months after committing the crime, most likely to get rid of any potential evidence against him. The investigators wanted more evidence to build a strong case against him. After examining the paper that contained the map and directions to the hotel, they found several fingerprints, most of which were identified as belonging to the victims, the mother, and her daughters. However, there was a palm print on the paper that matched Oba Chandler's handprint, and that's where they felt they didn't need any more evidence. Oba Chandler stood in court in front of the judge and jury, and the prosecutor presented the evidence they had against him. Chandler continued to claim his innocence, but the evidence against him was strong, including his handwriting and the palm print on the paper. In an attempt to escape the charges, especially this crucial piece of evidence, he told them a different story. He claimed that he had actually met Joan and her daughters at a gas station, and the mother appeared to be lost and asked for directions. So, he said, he took the paper, which was a map with directions to a hotel, and wrote on it for her. According to him, that was the extent of their interaction. The detectives were certain that after providing the mother with directions to the hotel, he engaged in conversation with her, portraying himself as a friendly and pleasant individual. Subsequently, it is highly likely that he mentioned having a tourist business offering sea tours during sunset and extended an invitation for them to join one. He repeatedly highlighted the beauty of the sunset at sea, attempting to persuade the young girls, who eventually convinced their mother to go on the excursion. Later, the mother took out a piece of paper and wrote down directions to the harbor that Oba Chandler had provided her. Alongside these directions, she added the crucial information about the boat's colors, blue and white. After that, Oba Chandler agreed with Joan to meet at the harbor 1 hour before sunset. On that day, they met at the designated location at the harbor, and most likely, when they found themselves in the middle of the sea, far from the coast and anyone around, the criminal pulled out a knife and began to threaten them. Of course, in such an isolated place, it was possible for him to sexually assault and murder them and then dispose of them in the sea with brutality. This criminal was undoubtedly one of the worst human monsters, as he likely assaulted and then, after the assault, tied their legs with cement blocks and threw them into the sea. In a testimony provided by his cellmate, Oba proudly confessed to the crimes he had committed. There were many witnesses against him, including one of Oba's daughters and her husband. They testified that Oba had made a surprise visit to their home and literally confessed to the crime, saying he was trying to hide from the police who were looking for him. Many pieces of evidence also pointed to him, including the sale of the boat and his move from his hometown to avoid police investigations, especially since images of his face had been circulated everywhere. After considering all the evidence and witnesses, and given his criminal record, the judge found him guilty and sentenced him to the death penalty. The death penalty was carried out in Florida, and Oba Chandler was executed by lethal injection on November 15, 2011. On the day of his execution, he wrote a message in which he claimed that they were going to execute an innocent person. The strange thing is that he still claimed his innocence, and even more bizarre, his criminal record didn't stop even after his execution in 2011. 4 years later, they discovered that he was the killer of a 20-year-old girl who was murdered in 1990. They found the girl's body dumped on the side of the road after the assault, and in 2015. With significant advancements in forensic science and DNA analysis, they reopened the case. They were able to find Oba Chandler's DNA on her body. This indicates that he was a serial killer, and God knows, he may have been involved in other cases that have not been solved yet. At least justice was served, and the perpetrator was executed. This brings our story to its conclusion. If you enjoy the Adrenaline Crimes content and want to support the channel, you have a few options. You can use the Super Thanks feature right below this video to send a one-time tip, or consider becoming a channel member by hitting that join button to access some awesome perks. If you prefer Patreon or PayPal, the links are in the description below. Your support goes a long way in helping us create more content.